wondered how a society actually transitions from a framework of rigid, top-down authority to one built entirely on universal human values? Well, today, we're diving into a really fascinating philosophical shift regarding the modern state. We're going to be unpacking the work of Ali Mohammed Al-Shurafa Al-Hammadi. Specifically, we'll look at his critical analysis of where political power and religious texts collide. Our goal here is to just neutrally map out his arguments, looking at the concepts exactly as they're presented in the source text. So if you want to understand how a prominent thinker completely reimagines this intersection, you are absolutely in the right place.
Okay, let's dive into this. The central question that anchors this entire text is this: does the Quran actually provide a specific form for the state? Now, this isn't just some rhetorical exercise. It's the literal foundation of Al-Shurafa's whole project. Think about it. For decades, political debates have just raged over what a religious state should structurally look like. But what if the entire premise of that debate is flawed right from the get-go? This single question challenges those deeply held traditional assumptions and really sets the stage for a totally different way of analyzing the text.
Part 1. From Authority to Value. This right here is the core thesis of his entire project.
To really grasp this shift, we have to look at his strict rejection of a very commonly used term. According to the source, Al-Shurafa actively rejects the term Islamic State whenever it's being used as a tool to exploit religion for political or authoritarian goals. His argument is that taking a divine concept and, weaponizing it for earthly political gain, well, it completely strips the religion of its actual purpose. It's a huge distinction. He is entirely separating the spiritual message from the actual mechanisms of political control.
Moving on to Section 2, the standard of the state in the Quran.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast he draws. On one side, we have the form of the state, structural blueprints like a caliphate, a monarchy, or a republic. But on the other side, we have the standard of the state, justice, mercy, and freedom. Al-Shurafa argues that the Quran honestly doesn't care about the structural blueprints. It just doesn't mandate a specific political form. Instead, it strictly demands that moral and ethical standard.
Actually, let me just read you his exact words to make sure we're perfectly grounded in the text. He writes, "The Quran does not provide a form for the state, but rather a standard for it. A state that achieves justice, mercy, and freedom is a state consistent with the purposes of the Quran, regardless of its name." I mean, that is a massive paradigm shift. Basically, he's saying that any government, literally no matter what it calls itself or how it's structurally organized, is perfectly aligned with Quranic purposes if and only if it's delivering actual justice, mercy, and freedom to its people.
Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. We're looking at the features of the modern state.
The author gives us a really clear map of 3 distinct pillars that define a healthy, modern state in his view. First up, the individual relationship. Second, the value system. And third, a critique of political exploitation. Let's just quickly break these down one by one so we can see how the mechanics of his argument actually interlock. So, the first feature is the individual relationship. The source material doesn't mince words here. Faith is strictly a private matter between a person and God. Because of that, he argues the state has absolutely zero right to intervene in human consciences, or to try and act as some sort of guardian in the name of religion. By getting the state out of the business of monitoring personal faith, the individual is finally granted true freedom of conscience.
Then, the second feature defines what the state actually should be doing. Rather than acting as a spiritual guardian, the state is simply a vessel. Think of it like a container. Its primary function is just to apply a value system built on justice, equality, consultation, which is also known as shura, and the strict protection of human rights. So the state's legitimacy comes entirely from how well it protects its citizens and upholds those universal rights.
Which brings us to Section 4, the critique of the political exploitation of religion.
So, the crucial point is this explicit warning we find in the text. Al-Shurafa strongly warns against any groups using the slogan of Islam merely as a vehicle to grab power. The argument here is that when political factions co-opt religious language just to win over populations or seize control, they are fundamentally distorting the beauty and the real purpose of the divine discourse. Essentially, they're turning something sacred into a mundane and often corrupt political weapon.
Section 5, the Open Question Project. This is all about rebuilding the link between ancient text and modern history.
This perfectly illustrates his overall methodology. See, the real value of his work doesn't lie in handing us final answers. Instead, the value is in posing major disruptive questions. He wants to force a complete reevaluation of traditional assumptions to rebuild that relationship between the text and history. To pull this off, the source material leaves us with three massive philosophical questions to chew on.
Here's the first one. Who actually owns the authority of interpretation? For centuries, that authority has been heavily guarded by very specific institutions or groups. But if the state is merely a vessel for justice and not a spiritual guardian, well, that radically decentralizes who gets to interpret the text, right? It asks the everyday individual to step up and engage directly with the material.
This second question is just as profound. How do we read our heritage without it becoming a chain that hinders our movement toward the future? This hits right at the tension between respecting historical tradition and the undeniable need for forward progress. The author is really prompting us to figure out a way to honor the past without being totally paralyzed by it, making sure that historical interpretations don't block vital, modern solutions.
And finally, the third open question. How does religion remain alive and interactive with science and reason without losing its sanctity? This one really strikes at the heart of the modern dilemma. Al-Shurafa's framework suggests that true sanctity isn't actually found in anti-scientific rigidity. No, it's found in a dynamic, living engagement with reason and the modern world.
The ultimate goal of this entire philosophical framework is summarized perfectly right here. The Muslim mind is compelled to review its long-held assumptions. The challenge Al-Shurafa presents is to contemplate the text with a contemporary awareness, to see it not as a book of blind tradition or some rigid political blueprint, but as a book of life, reason, and freedom. The source material fundamentally shifts the burden of understanding right back onto the reader. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. If the true measure of a state is not its religious label, but the tangible freedom, equality, and justice it delivers to its people, how many modern states actually meet the standard? Thanks for watching and keep
مؤسسة
asking
رسالة
the big questions.
السلام العالمية رسالة إنسانية لعالم أكثر سلاماً.